The air in the grand ballroom of the Oak Bluffs estate was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the underlying tension that only a Vance family gathering could produce. My family doesn't just have reunions, we have coronations, and my father, Arthur Vance, was currently holding court. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, my silk dress shimmering under the chandeliers, feeling like a stranger in a room full of people who shared my DNA. This was the celebration of the Vance legacy, a legacy built on prestige, old money, and the quiet crushing of anyone who dared to outshine the patriarch. My father stood up, his silver hair catching the light, his voice booming with that practiced authority that had once made me tremble as a child. He began his speech by praising my brother, Marcus, for continuing the tradition, despite everyone knowing Marcus had lost more money in bad crypto trades than most people make in a decade. Then, his eyes landed on me. He didn't smile. He let out a small, condescending chuckle that echoed through the silent room. He looked at the 80 relatives gathered there and said, "And then we have Maya, our little tech mogul. People ask me how she did it, how she built a multi-million-dollar firm in 5 years. I tell them the truth. Maya is the luckiest girl I know. Right place, right time, and a few diversity quotas to fill the gaps. It's a shame that hard work has been replaced by sheer blind luck." The room went cold. I could hear the clink of a fork hitting a china plate, and the stifled gasp of my aunt. I looked at my father, who was leaning back, basking in the perceived brilliance of his own insult. He thought he had diminished me. He thought he had reminded everyone that I was still just the little girl he could control. If you've ever had a parent or a person you looked up to take your hardest sacrifices and dismiss them as luck, then you know the fire that was burning in my chest at that moment. Drop a comment below and tell me if you've ever had to smile while someone tried to rewrite your history right in front of you. I read every single one of your stories, and trust me, we are stronger than their words. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened when I stood up and walked toward that projector is something this family will be talking about for the next 50 years. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply pulled a small remote from my clutch and looked my father dead in the eye. He wanted to talk about luck? I was about to show him exactly what kind of luck I had been dealing with since I was 18 years old. I hit the button, the lights dimmed automatically, and the massive screen behind my father flickered to life, bathing his shocked face in a cold, digital blue glow. The first image that appeared on the screen wasn't a graph of my company's earnings or a photo of my office. It was a scanned copy of a letter dated 15 years ago. It was an acceptance letter from Stanford University, offering me a full-ride scholarship. A scholarship I was told I had never received. The room was silent as the text scrolled, showing the signature of the admissions officer, and, more importantly, a second document attached to it. A forged withdrawal letter, signed with my name, but written in my father's unmistakable, sharp handwriting. I watched the blood drain from my father's face as the relatives began to whisper. He had told me back then that I wasn't good enough, that the rejection was a sign I should stay home and work for him. I had spent a year crying, thinking I had failed, while he sat in his study knowing he had stolen my future to keep me as his personal assistant. But that was just the beginning. The slides began to move faster, a relentless parade of his luck. There were records of the private investigators he had hired to follow me when I finally moved out. There were copies of the emails he had sent to my first investors, using his influence to warn them that I was unstable and unreliable, trying to kill my business before it could even breathe. Every time I had hit a lucky break, it was actually me surviving a landmine he had planted in my path. The weight of the silence in that ballroom was heavy enough to suffocate. My father tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but I didn't stop the presentation. I wanted them to see the depth of the sabotage. I showed the bank records, the ones that proved he had used a shell company to try and hostilely take over my firm during its second year. He hadn't just been a dismissive father, he had been a calculated professional enemy. I looked around the room, seeing my cousins and uncles looking at Arthur with a mixture of horror and realization. The great Arthur Vance wasn't a mentor. He was a predator who feared his own daughter's light. I stepped closer to him, the light of the projector casting shadows across my face. I told him that I had known for years. I had found the files after my mother passed away, hidden in a safe he thought I'd never open. I told him that every success he called luck was actually a victory over his malice. I had built my empire not because of him, but in spite of the giant he pretended to be. I watched his hands shake, the microphone he was still holding letting out a low, mournful hum. The luck he mocked was actually the evidence of my power. But then, the screen changed to something no one expected. It wasn't more evidence of sabotage. It was a video from 30 years ago, grainy and old. It was my father, much younger, standing in a small, dusty garage, looking exhausted but hopeful. He was talking to the camera, recording a message for his then unborn daughter. In the video, he was crying, talking about how he had lost everything in a bankruptcy, and how he was terrified that the world would chew me up and spit me out the way it had him. He spoke about how he would do anything to make sure I was tough enough to survive, that he would be the hardest obstacle I ever faced, so that the world would seem easy by comparison. The room shifted. The anger that had been vibrating in the air turned into a confusing, bittersweet ache. I looked at my father, and for the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a man who had been so broken by his own failures that he thought love meant being the hammer that tempered the steel. He had sabotaged me because he was terrified that if I didn't learn to fight him, I wouldn't survive the people who were worse than him. It was a twisted, toxic, and devastating mistake, but it was born from a place of deep, unhealed trauma. I turned off the projector. The room remained in darkness for a long moment before the house light slowly came up. My father was looking at his shoes, tears streaming down his face. The vengeance I had planned, the public shaming, the final bridge burning, felt hollow. Instead of walking away and leaving him in the ruins of his reputation, I did something that shocked even myself. I walked over and sat back down at the table. I told him, in front of everyone, that his method was a failure, that he had almost destroyed the very thing he claimed to want to protect. But then I told him that I was done fighting a ghost. I told him that from this day on, he was no longer my enemy, and he was no longer my hero. He was just my father, a flawed man who had made a catastrophic error in judgment. I offered him a choice. He could spend the rest of his life alone, clinging to his pride, or he could finally learn to be proud of the woman I had become without him having to pull the strings. The transformation in his eyes was instantaneous. The hardness broke. He didn't ask for a seat at my company. He asked for a seat at my life. That night, the Vance family didn't witness a downfall. They witnessed the birth of something new. We spent the rest of the evening not talking about business or luck, but about the future. I realized that the greatest power I had wasn't my money or my firm, it was the ability to break the cycle of pain he had tried to pass down. If you've ever had to choose between staying angry and choosing your own peace, tell me in the comments, how did you find the strength to let go? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about turning the tables on life, because sometimes the best revenge is simply living a life they can no longer touch.